The Right to Information Act in India is being implemented for more than 10 years now, and our decade-long experience has been a very rich one in India. Many people who have observed the implementation of the law on access to information in India have said it is a game changer. Now, what game is it changing? It is changing the power equation in India. In 1950, we enforced our constitution, and the constitution said that all sovereign power belongs to the people. But the experience between 1950 and 2005 has been that the real people who exercise this sovereign power are those who are in the political establishment or those who are in the bureaucracy. People rarely ever get to express their views or exercise their power, which really belongs to them as a citizenry of a democratic society. What the Right to Information has done in India is, the way it has been drafted, in order to seek information about anything, people file information requests. But it is not purely about seeking information that is contained in the files of government. Experience has shown that a large number of information requests that come from people living in rural areas, people living in slum clusters, those who belong to the most marginalized and disadvantaged segments of society, are about demanding accountability from government. Now, how so? In my country, the government spends billions of rupees on social and economic developmental programs, primarily targeting the most marginalized, vulnerable and disadvantaged segments of society. Experience has shown, and the government's very own admission has been, that for every rupee spent by the government from Delhi, the actual benefit that reaches these marginalized people is just 15%. What the Right to Information law does is, it allows those other people who are supposed to get the maximum benefits from these centrally sponsored schemes to ask the government in a formal, democratic and peaceful manner, why is it that they have not benefited from these developmental programs. So Right to Information is used in a big way by people in India who are from the most deprived segments of society to demand and access their rightful entitlements. They use the Right to Information law to compel public authorities and government departments to improve the quality and the outreach of public service delivery, like water supply, electricity supply, basic telephony services, sanitation, housing assistance programs, educational programs, a whole range of things. So to that extent, there has been a major change in the manner in which citizens interact or interface with government. I can illustrate this with an example. An RTI user who is barely literate, who lives in one of the less developed states in the central part of India, in a state called Madhya Pradesh, he told me a couple of years ago that, "Sir, thank you so much for teaching us about the right to information. Before we even knew that there was something called RTI, whenever we went to government offices to meet even some of the junior bureaucrats, we had to wait for days on end to get an appointment. And when we went into their office, we were treated badly. We were not offered a chair to sit down. We were not given a patient hearing. But today, thanks to what you have told me about how to seek information, when I go to this office and ask them, why has my housing assistance payment for building a shelter over my head, a roof over my head, why has that been delayed for more than a year? And I file an information request asking this question, the first thing that they do is offer me a chair to sit down. Then they ask me whether I would like a glass of water, and if I refuse, then they ask me, would you like a cup of tea? Can we get you some biscuits? Why are you asking for this information? We see that you have a problem. There has been some bottleneck in the release of funds. Don't worry. Don't ask us these questions. You take your RTI application back. We will ensure that in less than a week's time, your housing assistance payment installment is released. And in fact, it gets released. So this is the manner in which people are able to demand accountability and action from government which they are entitled to. Now this is at the grassroots level. At the higher levels, corruption is a major concern. There are all kinds of corruption scandals which have been exposed over the last 4 to 5 years in India. It even led to a change in the central government last year. People voted out the previous government and brought in a new government whose primary electoral plan was to reduce corruption. Now, the Right to Information Act has been used to expose both petty corruption and big ticket corruption. For example, in 2010, I think we had hosted the Commonwealth Games, and a lot of money was spent on building stadiums, developing sports infrastructure, setting up hostels for the athletes who come from various countries that are participating in the Commonwealth Games. So, for a long time, people were watching that most of the construction as preparation of the infrastructure for the Commonwealth Games was not meeting the deadlines. Several deadlines were coming and going. The city of Delhi was never beautified adequately as it was promised. The footpaths were never repaired as it was promised. So people started asking, how have you spent money on Commonwealth Games? How much have you spent? On what things? And it became apparent that there was so much corruption in the manner of spending of funds. Apart from corruption, another serious discovery because of the RTI activism of socially minded citizens and civil society organizations was that funds that were meant for the improvement of the life and livelihoods of the most downtrodden segments of society, like the scheduled castes, that was being diverted for constructing stadiums. So it was only because of right to information, when people asked for the documents to see for themselves how government was spending money and from where and for what purposes, they were able to discover this complete violation of the rules of public spending. So this is how right to information has brought about a big change in India. And an indicator of that change today is something very interesting that you might like to know, and your viewers might like to know. An RTI activist who began his career as a civil servant in the income tax department was completely dissatisfied with the manner in which he was required to work there. It's one of the notorious departments where many things that go wrong there. So eventually he gave up the job and became a full-time RTI activist, focusing on improving governance. After about 8 years of the implementation of Right to Information Act in India and the exposure of scandal after scandal, big and small, but after that nothing much happening in terms of bringing the corrupt and the guilty to book, he, along with a host of other prominent people in public life in India, launched what is called the India Against Corruption movement. And from 2011 to 2012, on at least 3 occasions, people from the middle class, from the lower class, from the upper classes, the youth, the women, came out on the streets saying that we need a strong anti-corruption law in this country and a strong apex agency that will investigate into charges of corruption against politicians and bureaucrats. Now that movement eventually transformed itself, at least the leading lights of that movement eventually set up a new political party called the Aam Aadmi Party or the Common Man Party. And you'll be surprised to know that the leader of that Common Man Party, Aam Aadmi Party, was none other than this RTI activist, Mr. Arvind Kejriwal. They contested the elections 2 years ago in 2013 in December and got a small number of seats, which was not enough to set up a government. We have a Westminster style of government where the majority party or alliance in the democratically elected house has got the right to form the government. So they did form the government with outside support of other political parties, barely survived for 3 or 4 months, and then they lost the majority, so they were dismissed. Then elections were held in 2014, and believe it or not, in a house of the Legislative Assembly of 70 seats, this Aam Aadmi Party was able to get 67 seats purely and primarily on its promise of good governance and transparent governance. And this RTI activist who started this movement is today the Chief Minister of the National Capital Territory of Delhi. That is the change that Right to Information has brought out, where over a period of time we've actually seen a group of RTI activists transforming themselves into a regular political party, which has been successful in getting people's mandate because of the freshness that they bring into politics and the innovative ideas that they place before people, most of which focus on grassroots level decision making, public participation processes, so that people would be treated as equal stakeholders in decision making in government. And this has been one of the biggest achievements, where people are increasingly exercising their right to be participants in public decision making process at the highest level and at the lowest level. So this has been a game changer in India.